just so that you're just a little bit familiar with what it actually, with how these things are structured. I'm going to be focusing specifically on engineering. Some of the other fields like data science are a little bit different, but it's still pretty similar. All right, so you come in as a graduate. You're a graduate engineer, focused on picking up basic job skills, particularly familiarity with standard tools. If you don't know how to use the tools, if you don't know how to use the processes, you're not productive. And so that's one of the first things that you spend all your time doing is getting used to these tools. You are actively mentored. If you go into a graduate program and you don't have an assigned mentor, then you're not in a very good graduate program. You either need an assigned mentor or you're working with someone who is dedicated to working with graduates, to multiple graduates. So yeah, if you're, and you should also be working exclusively with other team members on something productive. I do know of graduate programs where the graduates are kind of siloed from the rest and they kind of work on prototyping and so on, which is cool, but you're not actually getting the full experience of it. And so in my team, basically we generally have our graduates join teams, and sometimes we have it rotation if they're not sure which field they want to be staying in. So they'll rotate from back end, front end, mobile development, DevOps, whatever, just so that you can get a better feel for things. That's generally good, considered best practice with graduate programs. Make sure that people get to work in a field that they actually really enjoy. Once you're a junior, you can be relied on to work productively, which kind of implies graduates not actually relied on to work productively. I will say that. This is why there's less demand for graduates than I would like there to be, is just simply because it does take time for people to get up to speed and actually productive contributing. Even though you've had your years and years and years of education, it still does take time to actually come to terms with how you can actually be productive in a tech or in the engineering organization. It's just the way of things, and it's accepted. If you bring on a graduate, they are not going to be productive for several months. Once you're a junior, though, you can be allowed to work on productively. That's typically, if we go back, that's typically 6 to 8 months, 6 to 18 months after you generally spend in your graduate position 6 to 18 months. After that, you get promoted to a junior. You're still exclusively working in teams, but your mentoring is not so intense. You'll typically have like the seniors will be mentoring you, but they're not really, there's not an assigned mentor. There's someone who's, you're getting your code reviewed and so on, but there's no one in particular who's saying, this is how you do things. Instead, it's expected you've kind of built those skills already. Typically, juniors are building a specific solid set of skills in a specific area. That means that you are doing one thing and you're learning to do it well. You might be doing back end, front end, mobile, whatever, doesn't matter, as long as you get good at something. You're typically junior for 1 to 3 years. Mid-level, or you just drop the mid-level and you just call, this is when people just call it software engineers or QA engineers or whatever. You can now work with teams independently. You can connect the value of why we are doing things. That's important. Knowing the whys as well as hows makes a big difference in engineering. You are not there just as a person who takes in instructions and turns them into code. It's not good enough as an engineer. When you're junior, that's fine, but you are expected to actually build an understanding of how things work and why things are done. Finally, you're typically, by the time you're mid-level, you're an expert in one domain, not complete 100% knowledge, of course, but you know one domain pretty damn well. And you can start building breadth at this point. You can start working across multiple domains reliably. You might focus on mobile development, but you want to start taking on, getting involved in some of the back end, because the back end engineers are always taking so long to get the APIs together to support the work you're doing on the mobile. And so you start building out your capabilities. I will also say that this is really encouraged from a management perspective, because it means that if someone gets sick, somebody else knows how to do something, rather than having just one person who's the only guy who knows how to do something. All right, then there's the seniors. Seniors can oversee projects. Most important, the difference is that they can oversee projects and mentor team members. They have a strong understanding of business motivations, and that's why they can oversee projects, because they can understand the expectations, they can understand the business requirements, they can see the future needs and how to build better projects, and they can challenge, for example, a product manager saying, hey, if we do it like this, then down the road we're going to have this problem. This is what it means to be a senior, is that you are not just, you're good at the engineering, but beyond that, you understand why you have got a really good grasp as to how to solve problems. That's the most important thing about being an engineer, is we're here to solve problems. And when you're a senior engineer, you're good at solving problems in this way that they stay solved. That's the most important thing. Typically, you're going to spend at least 4 years as a senior, most of the time significantly more than that. Seniors frequently, a lot of engineers don't go beyond being a senior. And that's perfectly fine. This is the highest level at which you're actually spending most of your time doing engineering. You go any higher than this, you spend your time doing other things. So this is why, if you want to continue, if you're really enjoying writing code and solving problems and that kind of thing, it's a really good place to start. And that's fun. Then you get to the side which some people consider even more senior engineer, but also it starts stopping, you stop actually doing like coding. Architects, senior engineers who have gone into actually the high level design and left behind the actual implementation side of things. They give the vision of how to achieve the business goals. They are engineers. They have had all the experience of a senior and they've done it all themselves, but they now know it well enough that they can give solid advice. They can say, this is how we should be doing this, because I've done this before. I know how this works. If we do it like that, it's not going to work because we're going to have these problems. And so we should do it like this. And they know their field well enough. And there's various types of architects. It can be software architects, could be cloud architects, could be system architects, whatever. But they know their field well enough. Then QA architects, they are QA architects. They are just the best source of advice possible, and they can set things up such that projects will be successful. You always want someone who involved in the planning and scoping process, who knows what they're talking about, so that by the time it starts getting implemented, you don't get to 2/3 of the way through the project and go, oh, this isn't going to work. That's my personal nightmare, and it's happened way too many times, which is why you learn that you need the right people early on to make sure that things are done right. And this is what architects are there for. And also they've got the far-ranging vision, so that they're not doing things not just for what needs to be done right now, but they're also setting things up so that 3 or 4 projects down the way, you don't go, oh, hang on, we're going to have to throw this all out because it no longer fits our needs. That's what the architect is there for, is to avoid that problem. Of course, they have a major impact on the engineering and culture and decision making. There's basically no one who has more, because they are the most senior at the engineering level, basically. And plenty of people stay as architects. That is a final point of your career. You can have seniorities within architecture. Sometimes you can have even junior architects, mid-level architects, senior architects. But even the most junior architect is typically at the same level of experience as a senior. Bill Gates, when he finished up, we don't talk much about Bill Gates lately, but Bill Gates, his final position at Microsoft was as their lead architect. That's how important the architect is. Finally, generally considered equal to the architect is this engineering manager. This is typically how it's structured in my experience. Sometimes you've got architects reporting into engineering managers, but in my experience, they generally have, if there's multiple architects, they will have a lead architect who then reports into the CTO. Instead, engineering managers lead groups of engineers, teams of engineers, make sure they have everything they need to achieve success, tools, time, concentration. And concentration, you'd be amazed, is one of the most important things that engineering managers spends their time on, to make sure everyone has a chance to focus on getting things done. They represent the engineering in management meetings. They make sure that the voice of their team is heard. They take care of hiring and, when necessary, productivity issues if people are having problems being productive. They have significant impact on decision-making and engineering culture, frequently not as much as their architects. Architects often have more in that. And of course, they're a fast stage of career for many. I know plenty of our engineering managers who've stayed as engineering managers, and that's where they've stayed, and that's fine. Engineering managers, not all engineering managers were engineers, but the best ones are. I can pretty much, if you're Engineering teams who are led by non-engineering managers tend not to be nearly as productive. And this is, I've worked in these teams. I've worked in teams with engineering managers. I've worked in teams without engineering managers. I've been an engineering manager. I've seen teams being run by colleagues who are not engineering managers. I can tell you now, if you do not understand how engineering works, you're not going to be a good good manager of engineers. And it even just comes down to getting respect of your engineering peers. If you can talk authoritatively about the same problems that they're running into, you can sympathize, you can empathize with the issues that the engineers are running into. It makes a big difference. Finally, Chief Technology Officer tends to be the top of the engineering department. There's also a position VP of Engineering. That's kind of the Chief Engineering Manager. So you might have Director of Engineering or something like that, which is the same thing. They work hand in hand with the CTO, basically. So in that kind of circumstance, that means that the VP or Director of Engineering is there to focus on making sure the team is productive, that recruiting is going well, that everything's, that basically that the engineering department is delivering on what's expected, which frees up the CTO, because the CTO combines engineering manager and architect. You have to have both to be an effective engineer at CTO, in my experience, as well as project management and all the other things that are involved. Part of my job as CTO is to represent engineering at the highest levels. So that's in executive meetings, with boards, our board, with our investors, and also talking to executives from other companies, because frequently, for some reason, a lot of executives don't take people seriously until they're another executive. So I get wheeled in to chat with other executives to make sure they understand what's actually, so they actually listen to us. So sometimes I'll be talking to, the CTO of Dunkin' Donuts or Coles or whatever. So it's because that's apparently you need to be the CTO to talk to the CTO, which is, I find a bit weird, but hey, apparently it's the way the world works. So the CTO's other responsibilities are to define the overall engineering vision and strategy. They don't say, the CTO generally doesn't define what's going to be built. That's typically, in most startups, Chief Product Officer sets the product strategy and the vision for what the actual product's going to be. Instead, this Chief Technology Officer has a vision of how they're going to get there. So they work very closely with the Chief Product Officer or Chief Operating Officer or Chief Executive Officer, whoever's setting the product strategy. It's the CTO to define, okay, this is where we're going and this is how we're going to get there. Give the map to actually getting there. Final say on decision-making engineering culture, because sometimes you've got to have someone who says, no, this is the way we're going to do it, because otherwise this is something that you'll get to experience if you haven't experienced already, but engineers have opinions, lots of opinions, and it sometimes takes a long time for everyone to agree, and sometimes it's stops becoming productive, and eventually you need to have someone who just says, nope, this is how we're doing it. So that's it's one of the interesting parts of my job sometimes, because it's not like I'm always the best authority, but sometimes we just got to get moving. And this is the final stage of career. I guess you could try and go into CEO. Of course, there's also things like advising on boards and things like that, which you can go into later on in your career. I think very few CTOs would actually look at what a CEO does and say, I want to do that, because honestly, CTOs are more fun.